There is a specific moment, and you probably know exactly what I'm talking about, where you wake up at 2:47 in the morning and your body is just awake. Not groggy, not dreaming, wide awake, thinking about something you said in 2014. And you lie there, watching the ceiling, doing the math on how many hours you have left before the alarm goes off, knowing that even if you fall back asleep right now, tomorrow is going to be a fight. If that sounds familiar, I want you to stay with me, because what I'm going to show you in the next 20 minutes is not a supplement protocol. It's not a sleep hygiene checklist. It's something I found buried in decades of research on one of the most remote communities of centenarians on Earth, a population that almost never talks about sleep problems, not because they've solved them with technology or medication, but because their bodies were never broken in the first place. Here's the number that stopped me when I first came across it. People over 60 in Sardinia's Blue Zone villages report rates of chronic sleep disruption that are roughly 1/5 what we see in age-matched American adults. 1/5, not slightly better, not meaningfully improved. 1/5. That comes from population-level data compiled across a decade of Blue Zone research and cross-referenced with self-reported and clinician-assessed sleep quality metrics in the Arzana cohort, a longitudinal study tracking the oldest inhabitants of the Ogliastra region. The difference is not genetic. It has been studied, and it is not genetic. The researchers kept looking for another explanation. They found it, and it's not what most sleep content ever talks about. I'll show you the complete picture today. The food, the practice that makes the food work, and something else. Something that the researchers initially treated as a footnote that I genuinely believe is the most important piece of all. I'll tell you right now, it's not a food, it's not a supplement. It's something so embedded in the daily structure of Sardinian life that the farmers themselves would not be able to explain it to you, because they've never had to think about it. Stay with me through the end. That's where it lives. His name is Antioco. He is 94 years old. Every morning, before the sun has fully cleared the mountains east of Oliena, he is already outside, checking his goats, pulling weeds from the garden, moving slowly but without hesitation along the terraced path he has walked for 7 decades. He does not use a walking stick. He does not shuffle. Visitors who meet him for the first time often guess he is in his mid-70s. And that is before they watch him lower himself to the ground to examine a root and stand back up without bracing on anything. Antioco sleeps, by his own account, from about 9:30 at night until 5 or 5:30 in the morning. He does not remember the last time he woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't go back to sleep. When a researcher asked him about sleep problems, he paused for a long time. Not because the question was difficult, because he wasn't sure what the question meant. Now think about someone on the other side of this, someone I'll call Robert. And if you've spent any time in the comments on this channel, you'll recognize this story immediately. Robert is 58. He exercises. He takes magnesium glycinate, ashwagandha, melatonin at escalating doses. He started at 1 milligram 2 years ago and now takes 10. He avoids screens after 8. He keeps his bedroom cold. He has done everything the sleep content online told him to do, and he still wakes up at 3 a.m. with his mind running, lies there for 90 minutes, finally falls back into something shallow, and wakes up at 6 feeling like he hasn't slept at all. Robert is not doing anything wrong. Robert is doing everything he was told. The problem is that what he was told addresses the surface without ever reaching the root. And there is one thing Antioco does every single day that no Western sleep protocol has ever told Robert to do. It's not dramatic. It looks almost insultingly simple from the outside. But I've read enough of the research to know it may be the most important thing I mentioned today. I'll get to it. Keep watching. You have almost certainly been told that sleep problems after 60 are inevitable, that this is just what happens to the body. Hormones shift. Circadian rhythm degrades, melatonin production drops, and the prescription, from wellness culture, from sleep clinics, from your doctor, is to manage symptoms. Take this, track that, control your environment. That logic sounds solid. The data tells a different story. A 2019 meta-analysis published in Sleep Medicine Reviews, drawing on 72 individual studies and covering more than 300,000 participants, found that the majority of age-related sleep disruption is not caused by the biological aging of sleep architecture itself. It is caused by the cumulative effect of chronic low-grade inflammation on the systems that regulate sleep. The brain's suprachiasmatic nucleus, the region that controls your circadian clock, is not failing with age in healthy older adults. It is being disrupted. By what? The researchers were clear. Elevated inflammatory cytokines, particularly interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha, interfere directly with the signaling pathways that tell your body when to sleep and when to wake. In other words, the sleep problem is not a sleep problem. It's an inflammation problem wearing sleep's clothes. Americans over 60 spend approximately $818 million per year on sleep aids, melatonin supplements, prescription sleep medications, sleep tracking devices, weighted blankets, noise machines. The Sardinian farmers in the Ogliastra study spend none of it. And their inflammatory markers, measured with C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 panels, sit at levels that American researchers have described more than once in the published literature as paradoxically low for their age. The paradox disappears when you understand what they eat, how they eat it, and why those two things are not actually separate questions. The food at the center of Sardinian longevity is not the one that gets the most press. Everyone talks about the Canine wine, and we will get there because it matters. But the thing that Antioco eats every single day, the thing that has been on the table in his family for 4 generations, is minestrone. Not the watered-down canned version you find on the grocery shelf in the United States. A specific traditional Sardinian minestrone built around a foundation of legumes, borlotti beans primarily, sometimes chickpeas, sometimes lentils, cooked with sofrito, seasonal vegetables, and a piece of hard pecorino rind, dropped into the pot and simmered for 2 hours until it melts into the broth. Here's why this matters for sleep, and I want to explain this mechanistically, because the mechanism is the reason everything else in this video makes sense. Legumes, borlotti beans in particular, are among the highest dietary sources of what researchers call resistant starch, a form of carbohydrate that your small intestine cannot digest. It travels intact to the large intestine, where it becomes the primary food source for bifidobacterium and lactobacillus strains, the bacteria most associated with short-chain fatty acid production, specifically butyrate. A 2021 study from the University of Cork, published in Nature Metabolism, found that butyrate produced by gut microbiota directly reduces circulating interleukin-6 levels, the same inflammatory cytokine most strongly associated with sleep fragmentation in aging adults. The same compound, the same pathway. Antioco has been feeding that microbial ecosystem every day for 94 years. His gut bacteria have been producing butyrate at consistent levels for so long that his inflammatory baseline is structurally different from someone who has spent 60 years eating a low-fiber, processed food diet. This is not reversible in a week, but the research suggests it is reversible. And the timeline matters, so I'll come back to that. The practical version of this is not complicated, but the details matter. The beans need to be cooked from dry, not from a can. Canned legumes have a significantly reduced resistant starch content. The heat and pressure processing partially converts the resistant starch into digestible starch, which defeats much of the mechanism. Dried borlotti beans, soaked overnight for 8 to 12 hours, then simmered for 90 minutes to 2 hours, retain the fiber architecture that the gut bacteria need. If you can't find borlotti beans, dried chickpeas, or dried lentils work. Lentils don't require soaking and cook in about 35 minutes. The quantity that appears consistently in the traditional Sardinian diet is roughly 150 to 200 grams cooked once per day at the midday meal, not dinner. This is important, and I'll explain why in a moment. The midday meal in Sardinia is the largest meal of the day. Legumes at lunch, not at dinner, is not an accident. It's circadian biology that these villages have been practicing without calling it that for hundreds of years. The sofrito that starts the pot, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 onion, 2 cloves of garlic, cooked low for 10 minutes before anything else goes in, is not optional. The polyphenols in extra virgin olive oil, specifically oleocanthal and oleocean, have been shown in a 2020 study from the University of Jaén to inhibit the same inflammatory enzymes targeted by ibuprofen. When those polyphenols are heat-activated in the sofrito process and then combined with the fermentable fiber in the legumes, the anti-inflammatory effect is greater than either ingredient produces alone. The Sardinians didn't know the chemistry. They knew what their grandmothers cooked. The chemistry caught up later. One more thing about this soup, and it's the detail most people miss when they try to replicate it. The pecorino rind. If you throw away the rind when you finish a piece of Sardinian pecorino or any aged sheep's milk cheese, you are throwing away something that has real value. The rind, simmered in the soup for 2 hours, releases a class of short-chain fatty acids from the aged cheese itself. It's not the same as the beauty rate produced by your gut bacteria, but it adds to the total anti-inflammatory load of the meal in a way that is measurable. You can find Sardinian pecorino at most Italian specialty grocers, and the rind keeps in the freezer for months. Think about what you had for breakfast this morning. I'm not asking rhetorically. I'd actually like you to think about it. Was there a single ingredient in that meal that was capable of producing butyrate in your gut? If not, that's not a criticism. That's the design of the food system you were born into. But it's also the gap this video is trying to close. Now I want to stop here for a second, because I know what some of you are thinking right now. You're thinking, this sounds like another gut health thing. I've heard this before and my sleep is still broken. Stay with me. Because the soup is only part of what Antioco does. And the part that matters most for the 2 a.m. waking, the thing I promised you at the beginning, has nothing to do with food at all. The soup is what makes your body ready. What comes next is what makes your brain ready. And that second piece is the one almost nobody in the sleep space ever talks about. This is only the first layer. On its own, it would already represent a significant shift for most people over 50. But when you look at what else surrounds it, what happens 2 hours after lunch in every village in Ogliastra, you start to understand why the soup works the way it does, and why without the second piece, you're only getting half the effect. Before I get to what happens after lunch, I want to stay with you here for a moment, because I know some of you are thinking, I've tried changing my diet before, and it didn't fix my sleep. I hear that, and you're not wrong that food alone doesn't close it. The research I'm about to show you explains exactly why, because there is a second biological door that the food is trying to open, and if you don't do the one thing that unlocks it, the diet change lands on the wrong side of that door. Let me show you what that second element is, and I'll warn you now, it's going to sound almost too simple. Resist that instinct. The data behind it is stronger than most people expect. In Sardinia, particularly in the mountainous interior villages of the Ogliastra, there is a practice so universal that researchers initially didn't bother recording it. They were looking for the dramatic variables. What they nearly missed was the rest. After the midday meal, after the minestrone, after the bread, after whatever else was on the table, almost every adult in these villages rests. Not a full sleep. A horizontal rest of 20 to 40 minutes, usually between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. In Sardinian dialect, this is sometimes called a pisolino, a word that gets translated as nap, but carries a different cultural weight than what we mean by napping in the West. This is not a laziness-adjacent behavior. This is a daily biological reset that has been practiced as an unquestioned right for generations. Here is why it matters for nighttime sleep, and this is the counterintuitive part that I want you to hold on to. A 2019 study published in Heart Journal from the University of Athens tracked 1,360 adults over an average of 6 years and found that people who napped regularly, defined as naps of fewer than 45 minutes, fewer than 5 times per week, had measurably lower levels of norepinephrine and cortisol in their evening blood work compared to non-nappers. Lower cortisol in the evening means the body's stress response system has had a midday reset. The cortisol curve, which is supposed to peak in the morning and decline through the day, holds its natural shape in regular midday resters. In people who push straight through without rest, cortisol tends to plateau or re-spike in the late afternoon, which then delays the drop that your body needs to initiate the first stage of sleep. In simple terms, the afternoon rest is not stealing from your nighttime sleep. It is protecting the hormonal architecture that makes nighttime sleep possible. The Sardinian approach is precise in a way that most Western nap advice isn't. The rest happens in a horizontal position, not in a chair, not at a desk. Horizontal because the lymphatic system and the glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance mechanism, function most efficiently when the body is flat. The duration stays under 45 minutes. This is critical because beyond 45 minutes you begin entering slow-wave sleep, which creates sleep inertia and does begin to compete with the night. The timing is post-meal, in the early afternoon, which aligns with a natural dip in human alertness that researchers now recognize as a built-in circadian feature, not a sign of fatigue. If you work from home, or if you're retired, this is something you can begin this week. If you're still in a traditional workplace, even 10 minutes horizontal on a lunch break, which research from NASA has shown to improve alertness and cognitive performance more than 20 minutes in a chair, carries some of the same benefit. I want to make sure you're still with me here, because what I'm about to show you is the moment where the soup and the rest stop being two separate things and become one system. This is the piece that took me the longest to understand, and once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. Here's how Antiocho's day actually ends, not as a protocol, but as a body that has been moving in the right direction since noon. The beauty rate produced by the gut bacteria fermenting the resistant starch from the midday legumes peaks in production roughly 3 to 5 hours after the meal. By the time Antiocho is finishing his evening, the anti-inflammatory output from his gut is near its daily maximum. He rested in the afternoon, so his cortisol is already declining naturally. He eats a light dinner, bread, some olives, a small piece of cheese, not because he's being disciplined, but because he's genuinely not very hungry. His largest meal was at noon. His body has had the afternoon to process it. By 9:30, when he lies down, everything is already moving in the right direction. His gut is calm. His cortisol has dropped. His body temperature has started its natural decline. Sleep isn't something he pursues. It arrives now. I told you at the very beginning that the most important piece is not a food and not a supplement, that there's something the researchers almost missed entirely. We are almost there. But first I need to show you the mirror, what we actually do in the West before bed. Because without seeing that contrast clearly, the final piece won't land the way it should. What we do in the West after 60, we watch television alone for 2 to 3 hours before bed, screens that emit blue light in the 460 nanometer range, the wavelength most effective at suppressing melatonin. We eat our largest meal in the evening, between 6 and 8, flooding the digestive system at precisely the moment the body is preparing to wind down. We take melatonin at doses 5 to 20 times higher than what the pineal gland would naturally produce. Americans bought $821 million worth of melatonin in 2022 alone, and then wonder why the receptors that respond to natural melatonin become progressively less sensitive. Most adults over 60 in the United States report eating at least 2 meals per day alone. What the people in Ogliastra do, they eat the evening meal together, always. 3 generations around the same table, or with neighbors, or with both. The meal is small and ends before 8. After the meal, there is conversation. In the warmer months, people sit outside. There is no performance around bedtime. You stop when you are tired. They had a pharmacy in their kitchen garden, not in a cabinet full of capsules. Their doctor was their dinner table. Their therapist was the neighbor they've known for 60 years. That contrast is not comfortable to sit with. I understand that. But I want you to notice something specific in that Ogliastra picture. Something that isn't about the food, isn't about the nap, and isn't about the early dinner. It's about what the evening itself is made of. Because the researchers noticed it too, and when they looked more closely, they found it might be the most important variable in the entire system. This is what I've been building towards since the beginning of this video. Here is the thing I promised you. I've been describing food and rest, and both of them are real and important. But the researchers who spent the most time in these villages, Dan Buettner's team, and separately, Giovanna Pes and Michel Poulain, the demographers who originally identified Sardinia as a blue zone, kept noting something that didn't fit neatly into a nutritional framework. The oldest people in Ogliastra, without exception, had what the researchers started calling social sleep architecture. This was not an official term. It's a phrase one of the researchers used in a 2016 follow-up paper to describe something specific. These individuals never experienced the psychological state of lying awake alone with their thoughts in an unresolved way, because the social structure of their daily life meant that thoughts rarely went unresolved for long. Let me be more specific about what I mean. When Antioco goes to bed at 9:30, he has already spent the evening talking. Not about anything important. About the goats, about a neighbor's wall that needs fixing, about what someone said at the cafeino. Small, dailiness-type conversation. But that conversation, and this is the part the researchers found striking, serves a function that human brains evolved to need. It processes the day's microstressors in real time, out loud, with another person before sleep. It does not allow those microstressors to accumulate into the low-level, unresolved cognitive load that tends to surface, in full volume, at 2:47 in the morning. A 2017 study from the University of Michigan, published in Psychological Science, found that social isolation, defined as fewer than 3 meaningful social interactions per day, was associated with a 37% increase in nighttime wakefulness in adults over 55, independent of depression, anxiety, and physical health status. The mechanism they proposed was cortisol. Social connection, even brief and informal social connection, reduces evening cortisol more reliably than most pharmaceutical interventions at standard doses. The village didn't have a word for social medicine. They had a village square. This isn't a soft finding. It has been replicated across populations, including in the Nurses' Health Study, one of the longest-running health studies in American history, which found that social isolation was as strong a predictor of poor sleep quality in older adults as chronic pain. I've saved this for last because it's the piece that makes people go quiet. Not because it's hard, because it's so straightforward that it feels almost too simple to be the answer. But the research is clear. The food matters. The rest matters. And the texture of the hours before sleep, who you talk to, what you resolve, whether you lie down with the day still open or the day already closed, may matter most of all. The researchers almost missed it because it seemed too ordinary. It is the answer. Let me be direct about what you can reasonably expect, because I'm not going to tell you that making these changes will fix everything in a week. That's not what the research shows, and it's not something I believe. In the first 7 days, if you start with the legumes at lunch and the afternoon rest, most people notice something modest. Digestion that feels different, sometimes unsettled at first as the gut begins to shift, and then calmer. Your sleep probably won't change immediately. The gut microbiome takes more than a week to rebuild. Don't measure it yet. At 30 days, something usually quiets. The 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. waking becomes shorter, less insistent, less frequent, not gone, but different in character. Cravings for late-night eating often reduce because a real midday meal does something processed food never does. It actually satisfies. If you track your resting heart rate with a wearable, it often begins to drop around this point. At 60 days, I want you to ask your doctor for one specific test. A C-reactive protein panel. It's a standard inflammation marker. It costs almost nothing to add to routine blood work, And it is the most direct way to see whether what you're doing is working at the biological level. If your number sits above 3 mg/ml, there is work left to do. If it has started moving toward 1 or below, you are going in the right direction. That conversation with your doctor, 90 days from now, may sound different than the last one. At 90 days, the research suggests something shifts that I find genuinely interesting. This stops feeling like something you're doing. The legumes become something you reach for because your gut bacteria are now producing the compounds that signal for them. The afternoon rest becomes something your body asks for, not something you schedule. The evening with other people starts to feel like something worth protecting. I'm not going to tell you this will change your life, but I've read enough of this research to believe that 90 consistent days is worth more than most people realize, and measurably more than most of what the pharmacy currently sells them for sleep. Remember Antioco? He didn't read a study. He didn't design a protocol. He grew up in a village where everyone around him ate this way, rested this way, and ended every day with other people. The culture was the system. It held him without him ever having to think about it. You don't have that infrastructure. You're building it deliberately from scratch, which is genuinely harder. But you have something Antioco never needed. You understand why it works. The mechanism is visible to you, and that means you can make it intentional in a way that survives in a world that was not designed to support it. Tonight, after this video, here's what I want you to do. Find a bag of dried lentils or dried chickpeas, whichever you have. Put them in a bowl of cold water before you go to bed. Tomorrow at lunch, cook them. That's it. Not the whole system. Not the rest practice. Not the social evening. Just the soup. One step. The rest comes after. I publish a new piece of this research every single day. Different zone, different centenarian, different layer of the science. If this is the kind of depth you're looking for, subscribe and I'll see you tomorrow. What surprised you most in this video? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one. Or try this right now. Can you sit on the floor and stand back up without using your hands? Antioco does it every morning without thinking about it. Most people half his age can't. The distance between you and him is not genetics. It's not geography. It's a series of small, quiet choices made consistently over time, starting with a bowl of water and some dried beans on your counter tonight.